If I do that, I'm going to get more phone calls. Why would that happen? Well, because they're going to see when things are bad and they're going to call me. And it turns out quite the opposite happens because people see when it's good and when it's mediocre and when it's bad. But the more important thing is, in the context of the big world that they live in, it looks much different than what Jim Cramer's honking his horns about or what have you, right? And they become actually desensitized to big market swings. And when it really matters, when things go really sideways, those clients are not panicking. They know how different their money is managed than the overall market, right? Because you've educated them over time, small touch points. They just get educated, and you essentially defeat financial media by doing that.
Hey everyone, David DeSell here. And before we get into today's episode, this one is sponsored by our friends over at YCharts. And I want you to keep January 25th on your radar, block it off on your calendar, because YCharts is hosting a must-attend webinar covering economic forecasts, key industry shifts, and potential market drivers that you all should be aware of in 2024. And this is relevant whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, and you'll be sure to leave this webinar with actionable strategies for leveraging YCharts tools to not only navigate but succeed in the changing market dynamics. Register now and secure your spot, and get 15% off your initial YCharts professional subscription when you start your free YCharts trial, and tell them I sent you. Again, this is new customers only, and the link is in the show notes. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, but go ahead, attend that. And now let's dive into the show. Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, CEO of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we are joined here today by John Prendergast. And John is the founder and CEO of Blueleaf, and also the co-host of the Augmented Advisor podcast. And we're excited to have him today. We're going to be going through a range of topics, from client experience and client engagement, what clients come to expect in today's day and age as it relates to engagement. And then also we're going to unpack, and we've talked about this slightly in some other episodes, but we're going to unpack the topic of AI and ultimately how advisors can use it and use it safely. So John, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, David. Been a long time. We've been thinking about this, so I'm glad to get on.
I know, and we found out before we started recording you had just been on Libby's podcast, and I had just met her yesterday, and we're both going to be on each other's podcasts. It's always amazing to me how large our industry is, but also how small it actually is.
Yeah, once you cut it by those who podcast, it gets really small really fast.
It does.
And Libby's fantastic, man. Her show's great. I just love what she does.
Yeah, I really appreciated her energy on the call. And what was interesting about her, not to make this podcast all about Libby while it's fresh in my mind, I want to say she has like a physicist background, but she's an extreme extrovert, because you would picture the physicist background more introverted. And when she shared that with me, I was like, no way, because it just doesn't align with, the stereotype, so to speak. But I digress. So John, before we dive into some of these topics, so founder and CEO of Blueleaf, I would imagine, if I were to guess, that you didn't graduate high school or college and start Blueleaf. So what was a little bit about a little bit of your journey like from school to now?
Sure. And it definitely wasn't right out of school. I think Blueleaf is my seventh startup as either founder or part of the founding team. So this whole startup thing is an affliction. But Blueleaf is a long way from a startup. I mean, we're 12, 13 years old now and been around the industry in a while, and we're becoming one of the more established players. So as far as my background, I got a degree in computer science and economics, combination, and came out and did a variety of things. But immediately entrepreneurial. I was one of the first Boston Chicken franchisees back when it was called Boston Chicken, before it became
Oh,
Boston
no way.
Market, before it got sold to McDonald's and has sort of dismantled. I was involved in a number of tech companies. I was an investment banker for about 7 or 8 years. Um, and that was doing financing and mergers and acquisitions primarily for technology companies. And I spent a short stint, about 2.5, 3 years as an advisor. So I know the pain directly. And you know, 2008 happened. I was an investment banker at the time, and that really formulated sort of the basis for what became Blueleaf. It was a panicked time. No one knew where their money was. Clients were having trouble, and my friends who are advisors were pulling their hair out. And I thought somebody's got to do something about this. So I jumped, and a few years later, we were doing business as Blueleaf.
Love it. And for our listeners who may not be aware of Blueleaf, give us a brief overview as to what you guys do, who you serve, help us get a good
Yeah.
understanding around where advisors can engage with you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. I mean, engage with us at blueleaf.com.
Mhm.
And we're all over the socials. But Blueleaf is an all-in-one wealth management platform, like many that you've heard of, in the sense that we do reporting, we do billing, we do rebalancing and trading and practice management and all of that. I think what makes Blueleaf unique is that we are really geared around um, optimizing the advisor and client experience, and really built to help the experience that the client receives create love and appreciation for that advisor, right? It's how, if you talk to advisors, I think most of them would love more appreciation from their clients for all of the hard work that advisors do, and it is a lot of hard work. But how do you create a system that engages clients, makes it easier for advisors to engage them, and really amps up the client's awareness of those great services that they're being provided? And we really optimize for that, and that's why we've been known for a long time for our client engagement system. And I guess that's one of the reasons we're here today, to talk about client engagement and client experience.
And can you go just a hair deeper? I'm curious for an example or two of how Blueleaf helps with that engagement itself. Like
Sure.
what's that experience that you're able to provide in an example or two?
Yeah. So, man, we're going to do this a little backwards, in the sense that I'm going to talk about what we do and why we do it. All right. So if you think about how digital media works today, right? So this is the experience that all of our clients are having today. Grandma and grandpa are on Facebook. They've been on Zoom since the pandemic, and things have really changed. And if you think about how that Netflix account works or that Facebook account works, it's not just a passive system sitting there waiting for somebody to think of it and show up. That isn't how it works. What probably happened this morning was, from one of those services, you maybe got a message, an email, or a ping on your phone that said, "Hey, we've got these new shows for you," etc. So based on what you've done in the past, based on your experience, et cetera, that service reaches out and just reminds you, "Hey, we've got all this value for you." And then maybe right away, but more often than not later, you'll go back to that service with that on your mind. You'll engage with the service. And that creates what we call an engagement loop, right? So the service didn't sit and wait for you to think of it. It prompted you by delivering some additional value, and that pulls you back into the service to use it and get even more value. And we do the same thing for advisors. We create these engagement loops across multiple channels, web, mobile, et cetera, deliver messaging via email and SMS, and reach out and say, "Hey, there's this information your advisor's got for you. This is a service your advisor can provide for you, and it loops them back to that advisor's instance of Blueleaf, right? Which is branded, et cetera. So we help that client think of and re-engage with the advisor's technology stack digitally, right? So that's an automated system that will help contact and connect with clients on average about once a week. So 52 times a year on average, although it can be more or less depending on how you set the system up.
Of that. And I want to come back in a bit to the 52 touch points over the course of a year. But I want to first get your perspective on what I've seen in working with advisors. So what I've seen is oftentimes advisors do a really good job having a well-defined service model. Okay. They know that when someone comes in, they do maybe a pre-discovery call, discovery call, strategy meeting, so on and so forth, till they become a client. They have their onboarding process, and then they have their review schedule. And maybe that's whenever their 1 year or 6 month anniversary comes up, or maybe they do surge meetings. But however they have it structured, typically it's well structured. Where I find that there's a gap is in the experience model layered on top of the service model. So the service model, when you think about it, you're essentially meeting the client's expectations. Like they would expect that you have a certain review cadence. They would expect that you respond to them in a timely manner. They would expect that you get the things done for them that you talked about getting done for them. The challenge with that is that people don't necessarily refer because their expectations were met. They refer based on the way you made them feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So layering on that experience component helps with the emotional part of the relationship. And I'm just curious to know if you see something similar out there and what your thoughts are in general as to the importance of leaning into experience and not just stopping at service.
Wow, that's a big question. We could write a book together on this one, I think.
Well, we got time.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said. And what I would say is the service model is part of the experience model, right? Experience is somewhat all encompassing, right? It's all your touch points. It's how you connect. It's how you communicate, et cetera. Service is just, sort of episodic instances of that client experience. The service model tends to be driven by some internal cadences that you put in place, as well as the sort of episodic occurrences, where a client, instigates a connection. And I think that that's great. But the window or the lens that advisors tend to look at this through is very narrow. It's kind of built around the services that they deliver only, as opposed to the lens of what's the client's life like, what's the client's day to day, moment to moment experience like, and how do I fit what we do into that lens. And the difference when you think about it that way, you realize that your cadence of updating, if you're a planner and you're updating annual plan, great. You're maybe doing some traditional quarterly reporting, great. So okay, there's 5 touch points you've created per year. So you're delivering reminders of the value that you deliver 5 times per year. In today's digital age, do we think that any other service that's that important is that infrequent? And we often compare ourselves to doctors and lawyers, et cetera. I wouldn't say that that's a great model, right? What we should aspire to is a much broader integration with people's lives, because doctors are people you go to when you're sick, maybe some preventative stuff, but you can't check on your health. Your health doesn't change minute to minute in the way that your money can. So it's a different product and or service. It's a different way that kind of thing fits into your life. It's also different the way that legal services fit into your life. So we have to think about the way that our products and services fit into clients' lives. And then you start to realize, okay, great. So the money's a digital thing, right? There's not a lot of gold backing up money these days. And so in many ways it's a digital experience almost inherently. So how do we combine that service model and these other traditional aspects of service and advice engagement and the like with an overall sort of digital footprint and frequency, and we talked about 52 contacts a year. Actually, some of our best advisors, some of our fastest growing advisors are connecting with their clients 100, 150 times a year, because that's what digital services do. And as a result of that, there's a variety of wonderful things that happen. First, no, clients don't complain. They don't want, because you're going to connect with them with information that's valuable to them, not a market summary that's general. It's specific information to them. But what happens is the client's constantly gently reminded of the value that that advisor is providing, simply by showing up at the top of their consciousness, breaking through the financial media noise, right? That creates havoc with our client relationships. So you want to be in the middle of that on a very regular basis, but with light touches that aren't so deep. And that keeps the value that you deliver in those deeper touch points, those more episodic touch points. It elevates that again, right? It brings it up to the top of consciousness. And because it's there, then when they run into that friend at the cocktail party, you're just top of mind. Oh yeah, I got this thing from my advisor the other day. It was awesome. You should talk to him, right? It's more top of mind because it's an attention economy now. And if advisors aren't playing that game, there are others who are. And I don't mean just other advisors and advisory firms who will steal your clients. I don't think that's as big an immediate concern for advisors. I think most advisors have great, stable client relationships, but it does hinder growth. It does hinder referrals because the environment's changed so much. And I think advisors need to think about that environment and the client's life and how that works. And how do we deliver our service in a way that we become top of mind in a helpful, not annoying way?
So along that same line, and I told you I'd go back to the 52 touch point that you made. So I've had this view for a while now where, the saying where people say, oh, trust it just takes time. I'm of the belief personally that you can bend time in your favor, because I think that trust is based off of the accumulation of positive experiences and not necessarily based on time. So in this hypothetical example, if it was agreed upon and proven hypothetically that after 50 touch points, that's when someone's going to trust you, right? Let's just assume that to be true for the example. And you decided to do 10 touch points over 5 years or 50 touch points over 1 year, and you get the same result. Well, why wouldn't you just do all of that in 1 year and bend time in your favor? So I believe that the more interactions, similar to what you said, the more interactions, the better the experience. However, I think we've been trained over the years, so to speak, where we have 2 meetings a year, maybe we have a random checkpoint, and then we have a monthly newsletter. And it's like, oh, right. I don't want to bug them. I don't want to bug them. I don't want to bug them. Well, I think perhaps depending on what's contained in your newsletter, no one's reading it anyways. So I would feel worried about bugging someone if what I was sending was getting deleted anyways. So I guess my question is, how do you, and maybe this is accomplished through Blueleaf, maybe it's something else, but how do you ensure that those 52 touch points, or the other advisors that you referenced that are at 100 or 150 touch points, how do you ensure that that doesn't get annoying and it stays valuable? It seems like they're more micro touch points than it is like groundbreaking things, but help me understand
Yeah,
how the
that's right.
value is being added.
So I think a market commentary is a big ask, right? If you think about it. First of all, I hired you. I'm curious about the market, but I'm probably not going to do a deep dive. And I'm super glad that you're doing that, but I don't necessarily know how exactly that's relevant to me. I mean, I'm in the market because my money with you is in the market, but I'm probably not 100% in the S&P 500, at least not if we are doing our jobs as advisors, right? Um, so, so I think a lot of it has to do with the relevance of the information that you're giving, and that comes from personalization and being specific to each client. And there's nothing more specific to each client than their own money, and telling them small tidbits of information that's not deep more frequently will tend to be helpful because and relevant, right? It's about me. And oh, okay, I see that, or I see how that changed, right? Money does change a little bit every day. If you look at it weekly, it changes more, and you start to get kind of a sense of how my money moves and the like. And so I think you're creating an opportunity for a lot of small touch points with your clients, um, that start to educate them about their money and the way it changes over time. And most importantly, how that's different from the market, how it's different from what financial media says. And it's through those low effort on their part, low effort to consume touch points, that I can take a quick glance. I understand what's happening. Comes in, from David, and it's got his brand on it, but it's really specific to me. That starts to feel like almost concierge service, even if it's fully automated, which obviously we do, because it's all specific to me. The market newsletter feels irrelevant and it's nice, and I'm so glad David does that, but it's not about me. And um, and so we see the advisors that are most active in creating client connections using very similar kinds of touch points with their clients on an even more frequent basis. So if it's a newsletter, they might pull snippets out that are custom to the allocation the client has, and says, look, your portfolio is this. Here's the news that's relevant to that, and here's kind of why things moved. It's kind of more narrative, right? That takes a little more effort. Also, small micro touch points that says, hey, your balance change, your balance sheet moved from X to Y. Might be another kind of an update that says, hey, your retirement, it's still all green, small movements, but even that little blip this month didn't bother your long-term chances of success, right? There's a variety of ways you can update clients, and that mix of different things that you can tell clients about their own money and how it's changed over time, that creates very, very relevant touch points without presuming you've got good automation, without requiring the advisor to do a ton of stuff. I think as advisors, what I've noticed is most advisors think from an advisor driven narrative point of view. That is, if there's a touch point, I must create this written narrative. I must be able to walk a client through this thing in order to deliver value. And I think that's because it's from their own perspective, right? That's my perspective. That's what I'm personally delivering. But what the client sees is what your firm is delivering, what the services you provide are delivering. And all of those little touch points accrue to you, right? Those are all valuable points, that accrue to you, and also brings you top of mind. That frequency is really, really important in a distracted environment like we are today. And so if you want your clients to think of you, you have to be in front of them, but you want to be in front of them with these kind of things that have a very low cognitive task to interact with, and at the same time feel relevant and personalized to me.
So, as it relates to all those touch points personalized to them about their portfolio, I would imagine, it would make sense anyways. I would imagine that when you actually do have a review with them, I would guess that the majority of that is just catching up on a personal basis because they've been kept in the loop throughout the year as to what's happening with their plan. And certainly there may be additional planning opportunities, but I would imagine that the amount of contentious conversations, if the market's doing poorly, goes down because they were communicated with proactively along the way. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. So I think there's a few really key points in what you just said. So I think the nature of those one-on-one live interactions does change. And I don't think it becomes less about their financial situation, though you certainly have more time to talk about the personal. What advisors tell us is that those conversations invariably become much more future and goal focused. They become much more about what I as a client aspire to, what I want to accomplish. And you get to engage those higher functions, which, you're talking about trust earlier. The way you actually get clients to trust you is, yes, you do what you say over time. That's table stakes. But the way you really get somebody to trust you is they start to understand how you think, and they start to understand how you as an advisor make decisions, right? And they start to feel like they are understood by you at that much deeper level because you've heard their hopes and dreams over and over and over again. And you've given great advice about how to achieve those hopes and dreams. Instead of flipping through pages of paper well, how does that help you relate to me? It doesn't. So, so it makes those conversations much more human because it's not about a transactional information exchange. I think we've, as advisors, confused that with value delivery. It's not. That's just information. And if you can get that information in a format and in a frequency that actually helps dial back their anxiety when the market's weird and allows those more infrequent conversations to be much more valuable, that's where that there's the new article that came out, JD Power survey talking about extreme client engagement, the new alpha, right? You probably heard this thing, which boils down to more frequent engagement, although that survey doesn't tell you how to do that. We can do that. But the real extreme part of the client engagement piece there is really engaging human to human and really understanding hopes and dreams. But you don't have time to do that if it's just this transactional information exchange.
What I really like about this conversation so far is what I preach to the advisors that we work with is, hey, we need to automate as much of the non-human components of your business as possible, in order to free up time to lean into the more human touch points, right?
Absolutely.
So I think there is a place and an argument to be had that value is added under the scope of what you're compensated to do, and under the scope of what you're competent to discuss. But I also think that there's an opportunity when you don't have to, because when you think about it, you have 100 clients and 100 touch points a year. Like, that's a lot of touch points that you need to focus on. So if that can all be automated, you then free up time to do simple things. And these aren't groundbreaking at all, but they're really impactful. So like on someone's birthday, they get a card from their doctor's office, maybe their dentist's office. They get a happy birthday on Facebook, maybe a handful of texts, but they can probably count on one hand how many people call them. So like my thing that I've done for years is with family, friends, people I work with, they get a call at like 7 a.m. like even my friends' parents, right? To where it turns into a joke where they'll be like, oh, so and so beat you this year. And then I make a note, call them at 6 a.m. the next year. But something as simple as picking up the phone to say happy birthday. Something as simple as if you know someone enjoys cooking, sending a recipe. If you know that someone enjoys traveling, right? Send that, or they're traveling somewhere, send them an article about the top 10 must see excursions or whatever. And just like going that extra mile to hyper personalize the interaction with them,
Exactly.
which takes time. But if you're freeing up time over here with what we've been talking about up to this point, you then have the mental bandwidth. And then if you boil it down to, again, just making this up, hey, my goal is to advance 3 client relationships today myself. So if someone likes to cook, you have a document that has cooking, and then you start to gather resources. You have a a section about cars because people like cars. You have some resources for that. Personal development, you have podcasts, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, you figure out one of 2 things for the following day. So I'm a big believer in planning in advance. You either pick 3 people that you're going to proactively advance the relationship with on a personal basis. And then you figure out that next day how you're going to do that based on what you know about them. Or you pick a resource that you're going to use and you figure out the next day what 3 people is this resource relevant to. Even things like a random, hey, John, I just want you to know how much I appreciate working with you over the years. Anytime you come into the office and we meet, I leave there with more energy than what I walked in with. And I just wanted to thank you for that. That takes 2 seconds, and that's heartfelt, it's meaningful. So I've been rambling a bit. So to sum it up, I think that what I really like about automating the touch points that we've talked about up through this point is it allows you to have the freed up time to also advance the relationship, not just personal to them, but in a personal way with every other aspect of their life outside of finances.
I think the key here is that digital engagement and digital experience isn't exclusive of traditional client experience, et cetera. It should be an accelerant for it, and it should improve it. And really, the best advisors are mixing those 2 things in unique and innovative ways to do the kinds of things that you're describing, on top of a much higher cadence and much higher frequency of contact with information for the client, because that's the world we live in. It's accelerated. You slowing down doesn't mean the world slowed down, right? So you need to be in that cadence that people are actually used to now. And I think you asked an interesting question. So why aren't advisors doing this? And some of it is, well, what I'm doing right now feels like it's working, so I don't think I have a problem. And maybe that's true. I also think, though, there's a big component of fear. And we talk to advisors all the time where we lay out sort of the engagement model that we suggest and how we suggest setting our system up, and that their thought goes to all of the scary things that have ever happened to them about engaging with a client, right? Well, if I do that, I'm going to get more phone calls. Why would that happen? Well, because they're going to see when things are bad and they're going to call me. And it turns out quite the opposite happens, because people see when it's good and when it's mediocre and when it's bad. But the more important thing is, in the context of the big world that they live in, it looks much different than what Jim Cramer's honking his horns about or what have you, right? And they become actually desensitized to big market swings. And when it really matters, when things go really sideways, those clients are not panicking. They know how different their money is managed than the overall market, right? Because you've educated them over time, small touch points. They just get educated, and you essentially defeat financial media by doing that. I think the other fear is the extrapolation of a single client complaint. I've seen this movie a lot. So you've got, 100, 200, 500 clients, and you start doing this, and one client rips into you. We've all had this happen, I'm sure, in one way or another. You sent out a market newsletter, people lost their mind. For one person did. We had one advisor at one time do that, take that reaction so far that they just shut off all our automation. And the next week, the crazy thing was half the client base reached out and said, "Hey, where's my stuff?" And so I think you also have to have the courage to realize you cannot, if you've got 100 people, you cannot please 100 people. But if you can please 99 and one's uncomfortable, well, maybe that's a pretty good trade-off. Actually, that's pretty good performance. And you just want to make sure that maybe that one that you're making unhappy isn't maybe your biggest client. And maybe you can customize the settings to make them happy so they get their unique experience and somebody else gets another different kind of unique experience. But it all starts with starting, right? The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. You have to actually have the courage to begin in order to get moving on these kinds of things.
I've been smirking as you were going through that because you made me think of a story. Are you? And it's funny too because the person who complained about whatever the touch point was, the reality is if they're gonna throw their hands up in the air over something like that, I'm willing to bet that you don't like meeting with them anyways. If they're gonna be like that over attempted communication, so. But are you familiar with Brian Thorpe and Wealth Tender?
Sure.
So I'm working with this client. This was just over the last week. And I hope he's listening to this. Jerry, I'm talking about you, but he was super hesitant to start gathering client reviews because he had this big fear of what happens if they don't say something nice or my rating goes down. And I kept saying, I'm like, Jerry, if that was the case, they wouldn't be working with you. And so I finally got him to sign up with Wealth Tender. And then I get an email and he emails me and he's like, hey, I got the email drafted. I haven't clicked send yet. I just want you to read it through. I'm getting nervous. And I didn't tell him this, but I didn't even read it. Because all I did was I responded and I said, Jerry, press the big red button. Go. So he did it. And overnight, like within 24 hours, literally, he got 15 glowing client reviews. And since then, I think he's got like 5 or 6 more. He's going to send out a follow-up email. And these glowing client reviews, and for those listening, you can't see this, but my hands are spaced out a decent amount. Like they were paragraphs. It wasn't like, we love working with Jerry, 5 stars. It was like thoughtful. And like it made him feel so good, feel so appreciated. But oftentimes people are afraid to ask a question because they're afraid of what that response is going to be. And your comment about fear, I would encourage people listening to this to do 2 things. One is think about the absolute worst case scenario of the decision that you're contemplating. And if it's anything besides dying, it's not going to be that bad. And maybe you have 1 or 2 people that rubs the wrong way. But again, if 99, 98 folks appreciate it, then that's a net positive. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is when you, what's the saying? I don't want to be cheesy, but it's like face everything and rise is the acronym for fear. Like just think about if fear wasn't a thing, how much more you would accomplish, because it's not just about the touch points we're discussing or the client reviews that we're discussing, but there's other areas in your business, other areas in your life, other areas in your marriage, other areas, with your friend group that you don't do certain things because of the fear, but it's the fear of what? Like you're not going to die,
Sure.
So I just want to drive that point home because I want people to sort of feel free and be released from the fear of judgment of others.
David, I think this podcast is a lot about how advisors can innovate, right? How do they improve their practice? All innovation in life, in business, um, in financial services, in software, all of it depends on the courage to fail. It depends on it. Because with no possibility of failure, there is no possibility of progress. The trick, so I'm going to tell you the trick as an entrepreneur and tell you how I've applied this in my own life. But the trick is to manage that failure, right? And construct what you're doing in such a way that the possibility of failure, and not the probability, but the possibility of whatever that failure is small enough that you can swallow those consequences and say, okay, if that happens, okay, great. Lesson learned, moved on. As an entrepreneur, I told you I was part of the Boston Chicken franchise system. I was one of the youngest to do that. I grabbed a couple of partners. We were ready to go. And I had no money, not a dollar. And in order to invest, I needed $50,000. Now that sounds like nothing today. And it wasn't really that much in in the beginning of the 90s, like 1989, 1990 either. But I didn't have it. I convinced my parents to mortgage their house in order to finance that. And the way I reasoned that was I said, okay, the worst thing that can happen is this business fails and I have to pay back this mortgage over the next 30 years, $438 a month for 30 years. Well, I can get a job and I can do that. That will stink, but I can get a job and do that. Okay, I'm going to go. And by the way, I also have a big set of controls over whether this thing succeeds or fails, right? Me, I can control that. I'm in. And I think it's a great way to think about entrepreneurial risk, innovation risk, is assess it to your point. What's the worst case scenario? Manage that outcome in such a way that you're like, okay, that's fine. And then go. But don't waffle, don't waver. Set up your objective, set up your test. Everything in innovation is a test, right? You don't have to be right. In fact, you're not going to be. You're going to be wrong. Just let it be a learning experience that can improve the next one and the next one. And if you do that, well, we've all done the 1% per day for a month kind of thing. You're going to do pretty well at the end, right? If you can have that 1% improvement. So innovation is about having the courage to fail and the intelligence to shrink the consequences of failure to an acceptable level.
So I was an advisor for 7 years, and for the last 7 years, I've been in consulting. In my first year, I was probably 3 months in, and I have to be a little bit cryptic with details that I share due to an NDA, but it's still a story worth sort of dancing around. So I was a few months into the business, and I was still working other jobs to make ends meet because I had no clients, a few months in. But I somehow networked my way into a very large financial institution, and basically pitched them on redoing their training and development. So at the time, no clients. My other job, by the way, was driving for Uber at night. Okay. And I pitched them on overhauling everything, and I showed my father the proposal. And the proposal was for $1,055,000. Again, I had no clients. Okay. And he's like, $1,055,000. What's, just out of curiosity, what's the 55,000 for? And I said, well, Dad, it can't be an even million, as if like that meant anything. So fast forward, let's just say the deal didn't close, right? Although it was very well received, my point of contact there ended up switching companies in the midst of our conversations, and it just kind of died.
Yep.
So my takeaways from that are twofold. One, now when we work with folks, it's so easy for me to ask for 15 grand or ask for 150 grand for our services, because I already said the $1 million number out loud in front of a group of people. So it makes that so much easier. And then you fast forward 7 years later through serendipity, through a connection of a connection of a connection. And this is where I got to, still be cryptic. That deal has been reborn, and we're working on doing exactly what I had randomly pitched 7 years ago. But my point is, to your point, is I would have lost out on so many opportunities to learn if I said, who am I? I don't even have clients yet. I can't be asking for this much money, this and that, whatever the excuses are. But there are so many learning lessons that happen just because of the audacity to walk in there with a big number and sit in that boardroom with folks. So I would encourage people to think big and swing for the fences. And worst case scenario, you learn something along the way, as opposed to just falling flat in your face and staying there.
And you can optimize for that. You can optimize for the learning. We always say that we never fail. We succeed or we learn at Blueleaf. And everyone, in terms of their business, can take the same approach and be smart about what you learn and how you learn it and setting that up. And you can be incremental. You can take a small step. You can take a big swing. I think the most important thing is take the swing, big or small, right? You got to start, got to do it. With client engagement and starting to engage clients in a more complete, more frequent way, and all the things about that can be scary. Do it as an experiment. You can fire it up. We do this all the time when we roll out our services. We'll take a segment of a client base and say, look, I know you're a little skeptical about this approach. Why don't we turn it on? You can email those 10 clients, say, listen, I'm experimenting. We're going to do this for 4 weeks. And, if you love it, great. And if you don't, just tell me, and, we can make some adjustments. And invariably, to your, example earlier, invariably you get delightful results. And the amazing thing is when you share that with clients and you say, listen, we're trying something, I really value your feedback, your relationship actually deepens with that client. Because you're saying, I trust you so much. I really want your feedback. I want to hear from you about this thing that we're testing for all of our clients.
And in addition, I was just going to say, in addition to that, you're showing vulnerability. You're showing that you're human, and you're putting them in the expert seat, whereas you're usually in the expert seat. Like, we have a whole process. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dan Allison in the industry, but he has a whole process called feedback marketing. And it's to pause once every 12 to 18 months with each of your clients that you would love to clone and hate to lose. And you sit there and sincerely solicit their very specific feedback on different aspects of your business. And to your point, it deepens the relationship. And there a lot, even in that, like, advisors sometimes think, oh, I'm not feeling comfortable asking them to do me a favor, this and that. It's like, no, you're showing them that you value their insights so much that you're willing to take time out of your busy day to give them space to talk and to critique you and to compliment you. Right. So it's whenever you're feeling
apologies. I thought you were done. That is extreme client engagement right there.
100%. It's almost like anytime you feel the resistance to do something, take that as a sign to do it immediately. It can be as simple as that, unless you're, jumping off a cliff or something. Maybe give that a second thought.
Yeah, but give that a second thought.
Disclaimer. But I do want to pivot slightly, and I'm not going to be able to contribute much to this portion of the conversation because I don't know a ton about it. So I'm just going to ask the stupid questions that everyone else is probably, wondering as well. At the topic of AI, the extent of AI that I'm aware of, where advisors can use it is from like a marketing sense. I view something like ChatGPT as a good way to ideate if you're
Mhm.
thinking of, a marketing plan or content ideas or video script, something like that. But how are you seeing advisors using AI now, whether it be for their marketing, their systems and processes, their ideation, or what? Like, where is AI playing a role in an advisor's life currently?
Yeah. So the advisors that we speak with, that are our customers that are using it, very much the biggest use case is marketing and content generation more generally. Um, I and I think there's several reasons for that. One, it's such a boost in productivity in terms of how much stuff can I produce, how many ideas can I come up with, et cetera. Now, the caveat there, and everybody who's done this eventually learns, AI still, or these large language models, which is the type of AI that we're talking about, generally speaking, like ChatGPT, um, they don't create ideas, right? They can riff on ideas you give them, but that idea really, that editor's voice really comes from the advisor. You can think in those contexts, um, it's you're the editor and it's the junior copywriter, and you got to make a lot of corrections and changes in direction to get it to do what you want, but you don't have to do all the grunt work of creating all of the base copy. um, we've seen it used really wonderfully in client communication. So you want a custom client communication, um, write me a 2 paragraph uh, letter to this client who just lost their father, offering sympathies. Give me 3 versions, whatever. If you're not good at writing those kinds of things, you get 3 versions, you take one that's closest, you edit it a little bit, and now you've got something. It's an accelerator in that way. We used it at our 2023 um, customer forum. We did a session on AI, and we actually used it to create on the fly in about 2 minutes um, an investment policy statement specific to a state and an investment style. And bam, we had a beautiful, really well done investment policy statement. Would I use that, and just, you know, drag and drop? No. I think the thing about AI, you need to think of it as a new intern.
Mm.
And you might ask a new intern to do something for you, but you would never hand it to a client without checking it. You would never believe the sources it provided without checking them. And if you treat AI the same way, no fact is true until you checked it. No source is right until you've checked it. And it doesn't say the right thing until you've checked it. Then you're in good shape. Um, and there's a variety of there's actually a technical thing in AI that these AI models can do something called hallucination, um, which is kind of a funny way of describing what is really a probability model, right? That's all these things are. And they're super sophisticated and awesome, but it's a probabilistic model that's predicting the next word you want in the sequence based on the prompt you gave it. And as a result, it's just probabilistic. There are no facts in AI. It just most probably you want this fact after this. That's how it's coming up with things. Now, that said, there's extensions nowadays that can get you to use the AI based on facts. So, as a for instance, you can tell it today in the paid models to go out on the internet, and did this a few weeks ago as a test. Um, Summarize everything that's happened in the war between Israel and Hamas, and it went out to 5 to 6 different websites, grabbed them, said everything that happened this week. It can do that, and it was dead accurate when it did that because it's grabbing original data and all it's doing is summarizing the data. It's not sort of swapping in different facts. So there are various ways you can use it to talk about facts, but facts you want to fact check. You want to be your own good fact checker if you're using AI. And those are texts, text production. there's a ton of uses for AI in video and audio and editing. Um, so we use it on our podcast as a, for instance, ours is a video podcast. And in our podcast will typically have myself and a guest like you and I here, David, and we record on a system where I've got my own audio and video track, and the guest has their own audio and video track, and we can turn the AI loose, and it will cut to them when they're speaking, cut to me when I'm speaking. When we're back and forth quickly, it'll do a two shot. So this is a shot of both of us, and do all of that, which previously was taking an editor maybe an hour or two, depending on the length of the show, 30 seconds now. It can take a piece of audio, say someone misspeaks, and based on the audio in there, I can tell it to just regenerate a slightly different sentence. Or, oh, they said this name versus that name. I can tell it to regenerate, and it will regenerate a file that's basically, if I called you Chris and then later wanted it to say David, you could just tell it to regenerate David, and it would do so in my voice.
So I'm familiar with Chat GPT, but can you share with me the AI service or services that you use for your podcast, please?
Yeah. So we use Premiere Pro is our editor, and there's a number of plugins that do the video editing for us. I think the particular plugin that I was describing that did all the cuts is something called Autopod. Another editing tool that we use that I think is wonderful and really easy is Descript, is, like description, Descript.
Mm-hmm.
And that will do the audio fill that I mentioned. It does a great job of transcribing, and it can do a variety of other things. And then there are other tools on the creative side that we're starting to play with, because it can combine those same things, and then it can help you generate, say, social media content. And there are a few tools that do this. There's for ads, there's something called adcreative.ai. For social media content, there's something called Typeset, and you can just generate content based on your own original content or copy, and it will just run and create that stuff for you. There, and the number of tools coming out is astonishing, or extensions to existing tools. Just in the base Chat GPT, there is a code analyzer, and I can take a piece of data, drop it in there, and give it a prompt that says, evaluate this this data like a data scientist, summarize your findings, and blah blah blah, and it will come back with charts and text describing this stuff, and give a statistical analysis of the data set. So if you can think of it, AI's probably got a way to enhance how you're doing it. The one caveat I'd say is never ever share any personally identifiable information with an AI model. Mm-hmm. They tend to ingest and learn those things. That said, it doesn't come back out the way you might imagine it might. It comes out in bits and pieces, but you still don't want to drop that in there. Although funny enough, via the hallucination or asking AI to create, a social security number, it's not going to associate that social security number with you. But I mean, there's a 1 in a million chance that it'll just come out with your social security number, or what I forget the number space that's in now. But yeah, there's a ton of AI tools that are really, really, really phenomenal. Also, I think there's a lot too much hype on the tools that are getting created that are proprietary to this company or that company. I think I want to say it's JP Morgan or one of these, or maybe it was Merrill Lynch. I forget who it is, but one of these larger sort of broker dealers had their own version of ChatGPT. That's actually less capable in most cases than the general version of ChatGPT. That's just so they can lock it down in certain ways. Um, and that's more about control at the enterprise level. But with RAAs, if you're smart and you treat it like that lazy intern that you're going to double check all the time, and you never share PII, you're going to have a good experience generally with using AI to enhance what you do.
I think there was a lot of good things in there, but the biggest takeaway from me is treat AI like an intern. You would never put that in front of a client or put that out on social without double checking it yourself. And it seems like AI in its current state is a way to get something 80, maybe 85% of the way there, save a good chunk of time, and then you put your personal flair in it.
Absolutely. And the thing that we've learned is for creative stuff, say stuff that has to do with my brand, Blueleaf. I need it in my brand voice. I need to create a story about how all of this works. I was talking about the digital engagement loops, et cetera. If I wanted AI to write that, I have to have conceived all of the aspects of the story myself, right? I've got to do all that editorial work. AI could do some heavy lifting around, oh, give me a paragraph on how Netflix, works, or you give me it can give a generic paragraph, but the structure, all of that, right? That all comes from you. So you've got to be a good editor. And we often talk about a little work up front saves a lot of work downstream. And the smarter you are with thinking about what you want as the outcome, planning all of that, and then creating, in the case of these large language models like ChatGPT, learning how to create good, effective prompts, which drives everything. Um, that's really time well spent, and that can save you a lot of time and get you more benefit.
Yeah, I've seen posts on Twitter or X all the time now about, hey, look at these prompts, because a lot of time, like when ChatGPT came out, it was like, write a song about my dog, like all the basic ways to interact with technology before people actually really figure out how to leverage it. So I've seen that. And you mentioned something that's a nice segue. So you mentioned if you need help, telling a story, you can utilize AI. And if this is your first time listening to one of our episodes, one of the things that I ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. And it's our way of distilling a reading list for all of you who are listening. So, John, the book that you had picked out is How to Tell a Story, The Essential Guide to Memorable Storytelling from the Moth. So I'm curious as to why you picked that book, and if you could share a takeaway or two so that we can encourage some folks to scoop this up and put some knowledge in their brain.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about storytelling as a means to communicate. It's natural for us as humans, and um, we all have an innate capacity to tell stories. But I think many of us, particularly in professional environments, we get to just the facts, and we kind of forget the humanity of what we're trying to communicate. And for me, the essence of that is in storytelling. Um, and I don't know if any of your listeners, I hope many of them have listened to the Moth Radio Hour on NPR. Even if you're not particularly an NPR listener, these are fascinating radio shows where you've got a sequence of individuals, like regular people for the most part, not famous people, who get up on a stage for 10 to 12 minutes and tell a story from memory that the NPR staff has helped them craft into a real compelling story. And how they get there from, sort of, I tell you the, events of that happened in a sequence. That's not a story, right? Stories need stakes, right? They need a gap between what we hope will happen and what's going on now, and can the hero fill that gap? And stories often needs heroes and villains, um, and thinking about that structure is become fascinating to me. And the Moth has dozens of producers that are exceptional at distilling that sort of advice down so that really anybody could be a great storyteller. And I'd highly recommend the audiobook because you get a mix of the authors, other Moth editors, and the original storytellers. And they give you examples of, oh, so we gave this feedback and this is how it came out. And this was the problem here and this is how we solved it. And my experience with that book was it was like having a television producer or television writer along riding shotgun to talk to someone about telling their story. I've often wondered how television shows and movies create emotion out of essentially thin air, and that kind of storytelling. And it's an art, yeah, but it's also a science. And this really talks about those elements that anybody can recreate. So I can't say enough about it. I made my whole team read it. Just it's really fantastic.
Love it. Well, you sold me, so I just went on Amazon and I was about to buy the books I've been reading lately as opposed to listening, but I love listening. And since you caught me before I bought it, I scooped up the audio book. So that's next on my list.
It was tough to turn off.
Cool.
You could ask my wife. I would, I just wandering.
She's like,
through the
pay
house
attention
listening.
to me, babe.
Hey, what's going on?
Awesome. Well, John, this has been wonderful. I think we're very much aligned with the way that we think about an advisor and clients interactions. And it's cool to see that you have utilized a tech platform to help make it easier for advisors to do the things that we're talking about. So I really appreciate you joining today. For those of you who are listening, again, John mentioned blueleaf.com. He's also a co-host of the Augmented Advisor podcast. So if you're still driving at the end of this episode, go over, check his out. And John, hope to chat soon and really appreciate you hopping on here today.
It was great, David. Thanks for having me on.